All right. This is our office hour for September. Welcome, everyone. We're going to go around and do some quick intros. We just heard from Bennett, and we're going to hear from Terrell.
Hey guys, I'm Terrell. I live in Atlanta, and I worked with Seth a lot last year, and I've been working mainly on I have a Substack newsletter that comes out every week and is really nonfiction essays. I still am daydreaming about my fiction, but I haven't been working on my fiction very consistently lately. And I kind of go back and forth. My heart, it's like I can't decide between two lovers. It's like I've been reading a lot of nonfiction lately, and but I have been reading some. I've been reading Lonesome Dove. I've just picked up Lonesome Dove recently, and just have been loving that. And so yes, but in my newsletter, I'm publishing every week, so a couple times a week.
And there's a lot going on there. You're leading a whole bunch of people through the process of building up to a marathon or a half marathon.
Do a half, yeah, and a 10-mile. I'm trying to include different. It might be a bit of a, because there's so many people at different places, and there might be a different. But yeah, so we're doing a training program to run together, because it's a newsletter that's sort of based in the running niche, but I sort of write about things that are adjacent to that as well. So I sort of push it out into different areas.
Yeah. It's good. Do you want to say real quick?
I can put the URL in the chat window if you guys like. I'll do that.
Yeah, great. Gail, do you want to say where you are and what you're working on?
Yep. Hi, I'm Gail Massey. I'm in St. Petersburg, Florida, and I'm working on a novel, and I've been working with Seth for almost a year now, and it's been very incredibly helpful. And I think that we should all have a drink of something every time Seth says Gail had eye surgery.
Fair enough. I won't say it again. Yeah, Gail's working on her third novel. First one is published and rocketing up the charts of Audible. The Girl from Blind River is over 3,700 reviews on Audible. Not quite as popular on Amazon, and we're not sure why, but on Audible is doing gangbusters. And her short story collection just came out a couple of years ago, and the title of that is
Rising and Other Stories.
Great. Yeah. From Bronzeville Press.
What's the novel title again?
The Girl from Blind River.
Girl from Blind River.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Christy, it's great to see you. I haven't seen you in so long.
I know. It's nice to see you again too. Thanks.
I'm glad you made it. Do you want to tell us where you are and what you're working on?
Sure. I'm in Seattle, and I'm in my last year at Harvard, where I met you, Seth. And so I'm working on my thesis this year. Last year I wrote a book, and then I'm just kind of still trying to do the whole, I'm not so great at the publishing piece, right? I found two things I screwed up on last week trying to get published. One, I put my name on a contest. One, there's two websites that look exactly the same, and I was trying to build on I had one short story published there, and then I queried when I was out of town, and it's a website that looks exactly the same. So one paid, one not paid, and they just put it up without even telling me or anything. So kind of wasted a short story there. So that's
the horrors of getting a short story online where people can read it.
Yeah, but I mean, 83 people reading it versus like they did an audio production on the other one, and it was published. It's way different, right? I got paid, so you can join like the Horror Writers Association, just all those things that trying to build your repertoire or your resume. And so
if it's free online and you can share the URL with your friends, I've often found that it's really cool to get published on a website where you can just let people read your work for free. Put it on all your social media.
It was free too. They're exactly the same. It was just kind of a screw up. So you know what I mean? Yeah, it's out there. It's fine. It wasn't what I wanted.
All right. Fair enough. Bella, how about you?
Okay, well, I mean, what Christy said reminded me of a few things. One is that workshop I took with you at Stanford was where you were advising us to give it away. And I think you were recommending that we do it in a podcast.
Yeah.
And you actually gave us lessons in how to make a podcast and and how to do our social media and give it away, because you said that's how you got your start, even though you went to the Harvard of MFA programs or the Stanford of MFA programs, depending on which coast you favor.
Yeah.
And then you get stuck in the middle in Iowa, right?
Yeah, but that's where the good writers are.
It is, but they let you down because they said if you jump through all the hoops, you would have no trouble getting published. And you did jump through all the hoops and you still had trouble, so you did it yourself.
Yeah.
And then you were willing to share that with all of us newbies who had no idea what we were doing. So that's kind of a reminder. And that's why I agree with what you said to Christy, that, you know, get it online where somebody can read it, or you can point somebody to it or something. And I haven't really succeeded in doing that. I am working on a novel, which I was just kind of thinking about when I took your workshop. And, you know, it's ridiculously ambitious for somebody starting as late in life as I am. But when you have a short runway, you don't have time to fool around. Fool around I did, however, for the last number of years. I've written many hundreds of pages. I'm not going to tell you the actual number, but I think I have found the structure, another thing that came up that in this conversation, that is going to work for me. My problem was that I have a lot of characters. It's a multicultural novel. I have a lot of characters, two different groups, very complex, and they're going to collide. But I need to show a little bit of where they're coming from to make that collision interesting. And that was hard to do. And I think I have found a way to do it. And if there's an opportunity today, I'll float it past you and see what you think.
Yeah, I'm thinking we're gonna talk about structure.
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing to Christy, which is, you know, I have publication envy for you because I miraculously succeeded in publishing a short story, which was one chapter from an earlier structure of my book, and who knows, I may still use it. But and I published it in an obscure literary journal called the Chicago Quarterly Review, which does not have an online presence. So they gave me permission to publish it online. So for that occasion, I took 2 weeks out of my very valuable writing time to create a website.
Yeah.
And put my story there. And then I could tell all my friends to go see it, but I don't have that many friends. And, you know, nobody is looking at my website and reading my story. So I would love to have somebody not pay me to put my story on their public website that somebody goes to. And that's all I'll say.
Well, maybe Christy, you'd put the URL for your story in the chat, and then
oh yeah,
we can read your story and other folks can submit to them as well.
Good idea.
Julie, how about you?
Speaking from Providence, Rhode Island, where it's cooling off here, which is lovely. I've been working on a novel. I would say about halfway through, because I've finished the first draft. And yeah, I've been working on structure through Seth's famous scenario process, which I, for those of you who don't know me, went through once before and ended up trashing my whole novel. So, but this time I think it's working, and I'm excited about it. And I've actually made it through the scenario process. So I have a scenario, or a couple of them. And now it's going to be on to doing the rewrite, which I'm looking forward to, but am a little bit intimidated by. So yeah, I'm happy to, would love to have other people's viewpoints on working on the structure of their novels. And I guess other things that I might say it'd be fun to talk about for this time or future times would be motivations of characters and sort of underlying themes of stories, and how important are they to the actual overall story.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up scenario. Scenario and structure are really good hand in hand. Bennett and I also have had a million talks about pantsing versus not pantsing, outlining versus pantsing. Do you plot it out beforehand? And so that comes into the whole structure thing. And I've read Julie's novel, and there's no way this one is getting thrown out because we've been working on it together all the way through, and she pantsed it, but the structure is sound. There's not like the other one had a problem where there were some gaps of logic, I would call them. And so we had trouble. So that we uncovered something there that was really problematic. Nell, how about you?
I am in my last two classes at also the Harvard program. So I'm beavering away on my thesis proposal and my lit class. But I am working again on my Jamaican novel, having abandoned it for a while for another project I was working on. But I'm back on it and feeling good about it. And also just been reading a ton of craft essays and books. You know, I'm in the middle of Jenna Burroway's book, which I can't believe I have never read. Like this thing is like golden. It's like a golden, I don't know what. I can't even think of what it is, but it's fantastic. And also looking at Baxter, Charles Baxter's book, Burning Down the House. I love Benjamin Percy, Thrill Me. That's golden also. I'll use that again. But yeah, I'm looking at structure. Oh, there it is.
I've got my Janet Burroway right here from when I took a class at Harvard Extension with Maxine Rodberg back in like 1999.
That's amazing. Yeah, this should be essential required reading for every single class, I feel like. Anyway, she has a whole chapter on plot structure, which is great. She has a whole 2 chapters on characterization and through various means. And yeah, so I'm just reading a ton of craft essays and looking at my heroine's journey plot. That's sort of what I'm working on right now. So
yeah, I really thought Burroway's book is a good one. It's kind of it's just kind of a manual. It's called Writing Fiction, and it's got all the things in there you could want.
Yeah, it's got everything you could ever could imagine.
I've never taken a writing class where we wrote stuff, like a workshop where we used that book.
I'm so surprised at that because it's prime for that. Anyway.
Yeah, the class that I took with Maxine was like was about, you know, it was kind of a literature class for writers. And so we did a lot of reading published stories and analyzing them. And that's where we read the Burroway book. But yeah, I've heard it referred to a lot. Yeah, we didn't use it. We didn't touch it at Iowa, and it is a good one. So there we have it. Let's jump in and talk about structure. Bennett, you and I have been talking about pantsing versus outlining for a really long time. Those of you who aren't familiar, pantsing is like flying by the seat of your pants, and this is the plan for writing that I've really gotten attached to over the years. It works for me. I find that with my one-on-one private coaching clients, it really works. And it's about just really getting into the character's world and just following the beats of the story throughout. Stephen King talks about this in his On Writing, and Koch talks about this in the Modern Library Writers Workshop. And they talk about sort of using your rough draft to build a giant piece of clay that you can then carve your novel out of. And so Julie is at the point now where she's created a scenario, which is almost like an outline that you make after you have written the draft. The idea being that once you've written the whole thing, you're so in it that you can't really see what it looks like. So you kind of pull back and get the bird's eye view of the whole structure by writing basically just the outline of the events of the book. And you do that in 3,000 words and then 1,500 words and then 500 words. And you're at that point now, Julie, where you're looking at the structure and you're starting to have notes about things that you might want to question, things that you're questioning and things that you want to change about your book. Ultimately, that scenario sort of winds up being a to-do list for the first revision. And the idea is that the first revision is where you really focus on structure. You don't do any line edits or copy edits. You go in and work on the structure. And Terrell, you've done this with short stories. So where do we go from there? That's kind of the ground, the foundation for structure. Where's the first question, Bennett?
Well, my first question on structure was based on something we encountered in one of the last books we reviewed. And that was, how important is it for the protagonist to change over the arc of the story? I mean, I think it depends on the genre. It's hard to imagine Jack Reacher changing very much, but you know,
his whole point is that he doesn't change.
Right, he's who he is, and that seems to work. And I've tried to give some characters, going back, I've tried to sort of go back to them and set them up for some sort of change later on, and it never works. It always comes out pretty artificial. So there are some characters and some genres that don't always lend themselves to having your character change. Is that true, or am I just running into a brick wall myself?
What do other people think?
Well, if you're looking at crime genre, detective story, I think that there's a case to be made for the detectives or the protagonists being pretty consistent. But even over the course of the Lee, I'd say Lee Reacher, that's not right. Lee Child books, you do learn about him. He doesn't change per se, but he has experiences that where he possibly could change, you know. So that the element of tension is there around, is he going to change or not? And I would argue that's a change, but I hear what you're saying. The detective novel, a lot of it is liking the detective to be a certain person over and over and over again. But again, they have these subtle relationships. It's often in pairing with another character, right? That you see them change or fluctuate. But I can't think of other genres where there's not transformation.
The thing about Reacher too is that he's so mysterious that even if he doesn't change, you can get more of his background. And so the character grows as we learn more about him. And so Child gets mileage out of that. Gail says, even if a character doesn't change, they might or might not earn the objective they strive for. That makes sense. Bella, did you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think in any kind of series that has a continuing protagonist or small cast of characters, I think that the character arcs occur across books. And that's part of what keeps the reader coming back to that series. Sure, the mysteries are good. Sure, the crimes are thrilling or scary or whatever, but you're really reading about that main character or his coterie, and they're fascinating and you want to know what's going to happen with them. And that can happen even, that can happen in literary novels that have, you know, sometimes there's a trilogy or a quartet or something that can happen there too. But I think typically in a literary novel, you're looking for some kind of transformation within the book, as possibly as well as across multiple volumes.
Bennett, in your specific case, and I'm kind of relating it to the way that I've been writing this past novel, is that, and it is something that I'm curious too as to whether I have something sufficient for my characters to change or go through some kind of change or arc in the course of the novel. But I do think that the technique that I've been using, which is just going with the character and finding out what the character wants to do and more about the character, creates an authentic enough character that at the end of the process, and maybe not in the first draft, but hopefully by the end of the second draft, and I have glimmerings of his arc of change, and actually I have two protagonists, and her arc of change, and it's not a love story, but I don't actually have I couldn't put it in words at the present time, but I do think that they do change, and it doesn't have to do with my trying to force them into some kind of change that I've decided they ought to go through, but just learning more about them as characters as I write them. They've become real to me, and I can see them going on with their lives and doing what they're going to do, and I'm hoping that will. So I'm kind of hoping the book will write itself, right?
And it's been working.
It has been working. I have to say that it has been working.
I think the way that Julie's been writing, by writing consistently and writing into the places that she doesn't know what's happening, sort of finding the mystery as she goes, solving the murder, it leads to excitement and interest on the reader's part, on the writer's part. And then as the story gets read, that excitement, that energy translates over to the reader and makes the story compelling. I think you can plug into that energy as a writer, and it's both satisfying to do in your process, and it works for readers. And then there's this other way of doing it where you sort of look at it like a mad scientist and try to really, I mean, it sounds to me like if you're wondering, like, did my character change enough? Or does my character need to change? You're really talking about like going in high level and changing things around, which would involve a lot of rewriting. It feels like the question underneath that is like, is my book good enough? Well, maybe it's not good enough because I read somewhere that the character is supposed to change and my character doesn't change. So I'm going to redo the whole thing. Like, if I'm being honest, I've never done that level of revision where I really like pull the top off the thing and rewire everything. Like I find my story and it's compelling to me, and I hope it's compelling to a reader. And then I go in and fix the things that don't all point in the right direction and kind of trim here and trim there. But I've kind of found my structure as I've written, and then I just try to improve it to make it more of what it is and a better version of what it is. But that kind of question feels like, if I'm wondering, does my character change enough? It's like I'm expecting the answer to come from outside of the novel instead of inside the novel and the writing process, which is my connection to the character and where the character speaks to me and reveals himself or herself. And so I'm learning more about them from the writing process than I am from whatever the external expectation is about what a book should do or what a character in a book should do. And then like going in and sort of like imposing that on this poor fictional creature after the fact.
I think the question is, what's the dramatic tension? Maybe not change, but is there some dramatic tension that's moving the story, forward? Like I'm thinking of two recent movies, Manchester by the Sea and the Florida Project. Manchester by the Sea, the protagonist, the male, doesn't change, and that's the drama, right? The drama is he's not getting over this horrible thing that happened. And in Florida Project, they managed to tell this, what I felt was an incredibly compelling story about this hotel and the children, but nobody changes. It's kind of a day in their, it's what their life is like. The story is, how are they surviving this way of living, kind of. So, I think one doesn't have to change, but there has to be something compelling that's driving the drama and if you find another thing that would work.
I also think that perhaps, it's not so much that the character needs to have this huge, ginormous arc, but I think that having a character that actually has some, flaws that have the potential to change. Nothing's more interesting than a character that's a little bit more unexpected than what you think you're going to read. And I think that goes across all genres. I mean, instead of having, I just read a book where it's just a YA novel, but almost all the characters were just a little off center of what you would expect. And that made it much more compelling reading. And whether they change or they don't change isn't as fascinating as watching about the internal struggle against the things that we all have as normal human beings. And I think that creates its own character arc, just learning about this character and what their personal flaws are.
Yeah, if I could chime in, I agree. I was thinking about, it probably depends on the character, and like a coming of age story, like a Harry Potter or a Separate Piece, or, name any sort of adolescent story, then seems like it's really appropriate for the characters. But like, as I'm reading Lonesome Dove, these characters are already of age. Like they're late middle age, early, basically seniors. And they're trying, if you've ever read it, it's Augustus McCrae and Woodrow Call. And it's been a long time since I watched the miniseries, but Woodrow Call doesn't change. Like, he doesn't acknowledge that this young boy is his son, who's works on the team with them throughout the entire thing. And it's sort of the dramatic tension is he going to acknowledge that Newt is his son? And as they drive this team of cattle from Lonesome Dove, Texas to Montana.
Right there, that sounds like a story that I want to read. Like, if they've got a team of cattle that they're trying to get from Texas to Montana.
Yeah.
I mean, so many things could go wrong with that.
Right.
And it's a world that's completely not my world. So I'm curious to read about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't need the characters to change. It's like, wow, if they can just get if they can accomplish this thing, yeah, it sounds good.
It's so interesting being in that world. It's like, just the way Larry McMurtry writes it, it reminds me a lot of the books I read when I was a teenager, like Pat Conroy, in these sort of books about family, books about these saga kind of books that I was wondering to myself, don't get published as much, or maybe I just don't hear about them now. But, it's very much about all these friendships among this team of guys, these team of cowboys in like the 1880s or 90s. And he goes very much into all of their heads. And it's so well done. And you just love being in that world mentally, just going to that place and seeing them interact with each other, and like, what are they going to do? Because they're kind of washed up. And they were Texas Rangers. And now they're kind of like just hanging out in this little town called Lonesome Dove, and none of them are satisfied. And they're like, is this it? Is this what our lives have come to? And now somebody comes in with this idea, let's take these cattle to Montana. It's the last wilderness left.
Wow. There's another reason I want to read a book. The last wilderness left.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to Alaska.
Right.
I wonder, so is this all about the book that takes place at Stanford that you were working on, Bennett?
No, this is just in general. It kind of comes back to the pantsing versus plotting. If you start, I really basically don't think anybody is a pure pantser or pure plotter, because if you start pantsing, just sit down with your cup of coffee and start writing something. Eventually, structure appears in your head.
Mm-hmm.
You start to see the next 3 events that are going to happen. You kind of see where the love affair might be going, whatever. So structure seems to sneak in to the pure pantser's world, and the outliner starts outlining and sits down, starts writing to the outline, and something just doesn't seem quite right, and it will evolve in much the way a pantser evolves as his character grows.
But if I can see the next things that are going to happen, that doesn't mean that I'm plotting them out. They might not even, I might see them one day and then I might write them
But
differently
it's
in the
a
next couple of
structure
weeks.
will appear,
Yeah.
all I'm saying. So you can't write totally without structure as a pure pantser all the time.
No.
Eventually shape starts to appear in front of you for where your novel is going and what's going to happen next, I think.
I agree. I think that, you know, trusting that that will happen and that that structure that reveals itself will, it won't be perfect, but you're not going to have to redo it soup to nuts. Like there's going to be enough draw there and drive if you've been doing it the right way all along that you don't need to go back in at the end and say, well, my character didn't change, so I'm just going to go through and yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Right. But then you sort of have to preload your brain with certain elements that you want to sort of freely appear on the page, such as where's the conflict, where's the tension, and maybe where will he have change in the course of this novel. So having a character experience change almost requires you do some pre-thinking, pre-planning in order to make that happen. That's just the way it feels to me. So it tends to come out a little more artificial than just sitting down and letting the character evolve on the page.
I would argue for a third way, or maybe more, and that is a pantser outliner. That is, you pants it until you feel like, shit, I don't know what's going on here. I need some bones, I need some scaffolding. I need to understand, I've been thinking about this all in terms of physics, like the levers. What are the levers and what's mechanistically moving the story? I've got the skin, I've got the the other flesh and stuff, but sometimes I have to stop and I have to say, oh, where are my bones? Are the bones over here? And this is just a load of flesh. This is not really good analogies, but you get my drift.
That's fine, it's great.
I think I opt for the hybrid approach. That's all I'm saying. It's like sometimes I'm pantsing, sometimes I'm outlining. Sometimes I need to stop and think ahead because I'm a person who could just sit down and type 100,000 words and then I'm nowhere better than I was 100,000 words before. So anyway, I'm just saying I've had this talk also with Seth.
This is good. You guys are bringing up some good questions.
Well,
I'd like to jump in if I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with the woman who just spoke. Your name
Nell.
is PB. Nell? Okay,
Yeah.
Nell, yeah. I go back and forth and I have found that that keeps the energy right for me. One time I outlined a book for a couple of months and it was a really exciting process to outline it. But by the time I was done doing that, I had no enthusiasm really for writing the book. So to me, it's a balance like you're talking about.
Yeah. How about you, Julie?
Well, I get I think there's a little bit of what Bennett and Nell are talking about that actually goes on in my version of this pantsing process, in that I get to a point where I really don't know where I'm going to go next. So I will sit down with a pad of paper and a pencil and sketch it out. I'm not a very good outliner. My outlines have always come after the fact, but I'll sketch out what I think is going to happen in just, rough couple words, couple sentences. And then I'll sit down and start to write it. And quite frequently, what I write doesn't really follow what I sketched out, but the sketching process allows me to sort of provide some, what Nell was calling scaffolding or bones or some kind of direction to the story which allows me to move forward.
Yeah. Sometimes all you need to do is trick yourself into thinking that you have a plan, and then that gets you to keep writing, and then that's really all that matters. I think ultimately that's what it comes down to. You and I, yeah, we've had some head scratching conversations now about the process where you write 100,000 words and then you don't know what was going on there. And we haven't found a good solution to that. I just feel like for me, like if I write a fast draft and I'm writing every day or 4 or 5 days a week, it comes out as a coherent thing. It's got the bones, most of them. Maybe there's like an extra elbow or a wrist sticking out of a shoulder, but I can I write that thing and then I see where the skeleton is and maybe I need to move the wrist. But my step after that is to go back in and add the flesh, so to speak, and really flesh it out to show more on the page. Yeah. I think this scenario, for me, the scenario is really helpful because when I'm writing that way, I can't see the structure and I don't really want to see it in an outline plotted out ahead of me because like Gail said, I will lose my enthusiasm to write it if I already know where it's going. Yeah, the scenario technique got me through my last manuscript efficiently. Yeah, it did, Gail. And it's great to have the scenario to look back on as you're going to remember like, oh, in that chapter, this is what happened. That's how the character did this. That's what I need to do here to make that continuous.
What's the scenario technique again?
The scenario is the outlining procedure that you did. It comes out of the essay in the Modern Library Writers Workshop by Stephen Coe called Working and Reworking. And if any of you want, I'm happy to share that by PDF. Just send me an email and I'll share it. But it's basically making an outline where you write down a synopsis or a condensed version of the plot. And then you can see what the things are, what happened, because when you're in the middle of it, when you're sort of down on ground level, working on creating all the pieces of the garden, you can't see what it looks like as a whole. And so you need to use that to see the whole of it. And I guess that's the time to wonder, like, is my character changing enough? You can ask questions like that, but I don't know. Oh, thanks, Bella. Yeah. Bella's sharing her contact information if anyone wants to do that as well. Did you want to go ahead, Bella? You're muted.
I find all of you extremely interesting and would love to communicate in whatever way seems useful. I wanted to say, I didn't know that I was a pantser. I thought I was a plotter. And that's because, and I never heard the word pantser until today. And I think it's because I had a very high level of idea of like the core element of the plot of my book. And what I didn't realize was how many really interesting and worthy characters I would meet along the way. And so whenever I had my main characters turning away from each other and interacting with their world, I met new characters and, you know, would write scenes that had them involved. And they were fascinating. And I loved doing that. And, you know, I'm like Nell. I mean, I just produce pages and pages and pages. And I didn't realize that it was a big mound of clay and that I could carve things away and find the angel within. That's the Michelangelo quote, I think, about sculpture. He found the angel within when he made the David. And, but I think that's what I'm doing now. And I'm using all those pages and pages. Those are backstory for my principal characters. And I know the whole backstory. Right. I and my writing partners know exactly what happened because we reviewed those scenes laid out in great detail. But that doesn't mean they necessarily belong in my book.
Yeah.
So, and that's a little bit, you know, that's hard because when you labor over scenes and you even, you know, find the right words, you think it's hard to let them go. Maybe there's a life for them somewhere in the future, but right now it's good to carve them away.
Yeah. I think it's great to end a book in a place where you have extras, because then, you know, if your book, when your book comes out, you can publish an extra over in this place online or in that place, or put some up on your website, and then people have, or you can advertise it in the book as bonus content. If you want more bonus content, sign up for my newsletter,
I
visit my
love that.
website. And
I
so
love
you can
that.
use it as promotional stuff.
Yeah.
You know, we published in, I've been working on a journal called Ground with a number of my clients and workshop members. And we were really happy to publish an excerpt from Beth Wetmore that was basically an outtake from her novel Valentine. And we all read it and said, like, this is great. This is a wonderful story. But in the process of getting that novel published, they ended up cutting out all the male characters, and it made for the novel that it needed to be. But there's all these great stories that fell by the wayside. And so we were happy to be able to publish one, and it's great to read. But so that's how the writing process can be. And in some cases, it's much more dramatic and severe than others. But I think the process is really about discovering who the characters are, what their real issues are, and what the story is. And if I start to wonder, like, is my character changing enough or something like that, it takes me out of the connection space of being with the character. And that's where a lot of the really good stuff comes. That's what I think about. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a leap of faith, and that's what we work on a lot. I work on with clients, is like this leap of faith of like, I'm really going to connect with the character and the story and not ask the big macro questions, just like take for granted that I'm going to go through this writing process not knowing everything that I need to know, and things will be revealed to me in their own due course. And at the end, I can look back and see everything, but along the way, there's things that I don't know. And that's what the process is like for a reader. And that's where some of the excitement and intrigue can come as a writer and can keep bringing you back to the page.
One thing that Burroway talks about too is related to that is, you know, character movement begets discovery, begets decision, right? Movement, discovery, decision. And she also phrases it as sort of action, chance, and choice. You know, it's kind of like, and that doesn't necessarily just keep repeating itself, but it could, you know, and then it's always a matter of what's next, what's next. The writer's asking it, the reader's asking it, and then you keep delivering, and you know, it builds some momentum and tension toward the end. But that simple sort of, you know, trio, I thought was very helpful.
Terrell adds, movement begets discovery, which begets decision. What's the Burroway one that you said? No?
That was it. I was just trying to copy what Nell said.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a Burroway quote, but that's my quote from what I took from Burroway.
It's your paraphrase. Good.
My paraphrase, man.
I like it.
So yeah, but it was helpful. Like, and she gave a little example from a Toni Morrison story, and just outlined it very quickly. Here's the action, here's the movement, here's the discovery, here's the decision. Yeah. And it was compelling. And I thought, oh, this makes so much sense.
Yeah. I like it. You take a character, you put him or her in motion, he or she discovers something, and then what do they do with it? They make a decision, and then they move forward, which leads to another discovery.
Yeah. That brings us back to the levers, right? The cause effect, the Hegelian, you know, thesis, synthesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? I mean, that's where you're kind of building all the time. Anyway, I can get very theoretical. I'll
yeah. Well, so we can sort of like reverse engineer or engineer this as like big brain writers. And that's kind of the scientific method of doing this. But I think the organic method the thing that I always follow as like a general rule of thumb is like, if I'm really plugged into my character and I'm doing what that character would be doing and what makes sense for that character, whether it, and that'll answer all the questions, whether it's amount of description, how do I end this scene, what scene comes next, how long should this scene go, how much should I show? Like, it's all about the character, whether you're writing in first person or third person. And that's always going to be the thing that's the best guide. Just connect to your characters, Bennett.
I did have an unusual thought here. So given that I'm a hybrid pantser plotter, much prefer the writing I do as a pantser. And
There you go.
But it seems to me, as you evolve your story, you are developing more and more constraints. And you have to have certain things converge. And so maybe the reason it's hard to write the middle, or even harder to write the ending, is that you can't do the same freewheeling writing you did in the beginning, because now structure, like it or not, has emerged. You're going to have to bring this to a close, and you're going to have to wrap it up, which in itself is a structure. So you're almost condemned to be an outliner at the very end in your writing.
I don't think that's true at all. I think, I mean, with a lot of writers that I'm working with, Julie being one of them, like, there's still this fear all the way through that you won't have the end, and you're never going to outline it, but there's this fear that the end won't come. You'll be abandoned high and dry. And just finding the ending is both a joy and a relief, and you can do it without structure. I think we'll talk more, Bennett.
Isn't it a lot easier to sit down and start your novel as a pantser than it is to sit down and bring it to a close as a pantser?
I think there's different challenges all the way through. It's not like harder or easier at any given point. But I know some people, someone I was working with was saying, like, you know, I can understand now why so many people don't finish their novels. And she was so far into it that it was clear she was going to get to the end and it was going to be great. And there was no way she was going to put it down. But there's always that fear of, like, maybe it's not going to work out. And I think accepting the fear and working with it does a lot more than trying to, like, engineer it and sort of like plan your way through it. I don't know. I think we're throwing around too many words here and getting away from the heart of writing. Endings are hard, and you can revise them. And I love what Gail said in the chat. It helps to consciously build trust in the act of writing. I hear some of that lack of trust in the way you're looking at it, Bennett. So maybe we should talk one-on-one to get you to build that back up again. Because the stuff that you've pantsed and trusted, like the Italy thing or what was going on with the Stanford stuff, those are great knockouts. Great stuff. And we're about at our time this week. One thing I want to bring up is that I am looking to start a new small workshop of folks who are not, so I have the Wednesday night workshop once a month is really folks who are way into a novel and have the novel finished. And we're even starting to read whole novels each month and discussing those. But I'm looking to start up a new workshop for people to do short stories or shorter excerpts for folks that are not ready to work on or look at a whole novel, and start this from kind of a closer to beginner level of the craft discussion. So if anyone's interested in that, Terrell, you and I talked about it. Christy, maybe you'd be interested in that. And Bella, I'd love to talk to you more about it if you'd like. And if anyone is watching on the recording, I'm going to work on getting that workshop going in the next few months. And there was something else I wanted to mention that I totally forgot, but we can talk about that at next month's office hours, which will be here in October. It's really good to see you guys.
Good to see you too. Really
Thanks
good.
for showing up and talking. And I think keep writing. That's the most important thing. I think the real so I'll say one more thing. When I start asking questions like, does this book have the right structure? Is this character changing enough? Those questions come up for me when I've gone away from writing for too long. Sometimes I'm in the middle of a draft and I put it away for a couple of weeks and then I start to come back to questions like that. But if I'm writing consistently and doing the work, I never have questions like that because I'm just interested. And the question that I just ask myself is, did I write today? Did I write enough? Should I have written more? And so that's sort of like ground level there. That's where I can stay when I'm writing consistently. So hopefully all of you guys get there. And I'm glad you're all here. And we'll talk to you soon, okay?
Great.
All right.
Great, thanks.